planet's on fire. It's a real code red. Got us by the balls, we're being slowly bled. All the swollen puppet head, it propagandized. Big chocolate points, flat out lies. A house full of mirrors, it's a lousy reflection. Run hard left, it's a true direction. Democracy's in trouble, this news isn't fake. Everything we fought for is truly at stake. Border to border, coast to coast, it's time to view the challenge and meet our host. It's a podcast by George. All right, folks, it's showtime.
Hello. Hi. How are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Liveline, folks. Happy to be back on there. God, I love doing these podcasts. And one of the biggest reasons is I get to become friends with our guest today. People like our guest today, Matthew Ho, is coming back on the podcast by George Liveline. And, you know, it's good news we're going to talk about today, by and large, his candidacy. He's gotten on the ballot out there in North Carolina for the U.S. Senate. And it's good to talk about something good with a candidate that has some good ideas because of all the bad. My God, we've had bad news the past couple of weeks. I mean, it's been difficult to do the podcast. We've been talking about Uvalde, nothing worse than that. We've been talking about Ukraine. My God, nothing worse than that. We're going to talk about, both of those things today with Matt. But we're going to talk about some good stuff here today, too. So let's see if I can get him to come on in. Let's see if we can bring him into the podcast today and say hello, hi, how are you to Matthew Ho. Yo, Matthew Ho.
Hey, George, how you doing? How are things in Iowa?
Yeah, we're doing great here. We've got some great weather, really. It could be really hot and humid here and tough. We had a cold spring, really. And it's kind of turned into a cool early summer. It's really nice here, Matt. And you've had some good news to report. I want to bring this up on screen by way of introduction because I just love reading stuff like this for a change. So let me see if I can get this to come up. Now, this is out of a newspaper that I'm not too familiar with, the Port City Daily of Wilmington, North Carolina. But it reads, with the election coming in November, one grassroots candidate filed with the North Carolina State Board of Elections to be on the ballot in the Senate race. Matthew Ho represents the Green Party, an unrecognized political party in North Carolina as of the 2020 election. I mean, it was unrecognized. It says Ho secured almost 22,000 signatures across 96 of North Carolina's 100 counties. Here in Iowa, we've got 99, Matt. So there's some similarities between Iowa and North Carolina. We're going to talk about that here as we go through the show. And it's the first time since its founding that the North Carolina Green Party qualified for the ballot through running a successful petition drive, according to Ho's press release. Okay, so let me see if I can get this to come down off screen here. And I want to bring you back in, bring you up here a little larger so that we can talk a little bit. There's a couple of things in that article that are very interesting. The significance of having done this. Now, it wasn't easy, but it hasn't been done before, and you got a lot of petition signatures. That's the good news. But the bad news is it's almost like this methodology that they have is almost kind of like suppressing candidacies and third parties. Talk about that a little bit.
It is, and thanks, George, for bringing that up. It's something I've learned quite a bit about. Being a first-time candidate. I thought that, okay, we were required to have 13,865 verified signatures. So I thought, okay, well, we get a bunch of volunteers and some clipboards, and we hit the farmers markets, and it's going to take several weeks, a couple months, but we'll get it done. And it's not that easy, and it's purposely and deliberately not that easy. Whether it be just the amount of labor that it takes, the number of person hours. If we kind of figure that someone's going to get us 10 to 15 signatures an hour on a good day. Okay, you do the math. You divide 14,000 verified. So when you're talking about verified, you've got to get closer to 20,000 signatures to make sure we hit that mark. So you divide 20,000 by 10 or 15 signatures an hour, you realize this is going to take a lot of time. And then, how do you get people to be out there consistently for you? I mean, when you're talking about that much collection of signatures, you need people to give you 10, 15, 20, 30 hours a week of their time. I mean, certainly we have volunteers who would come in and help as they could, and they were fantastic. But really, how we did this, and the other side of it, as I started doing this, I have people from around the country say, the only way you can get this done is if you hire a professional petitioning firm.
Yeah.
And that's a whole sub industry that exists as part of our overall political industry, right? The election for the U.S. Senate, the election in 2020 in North Carolina, they spent $300 million on the U.S. Senate race 2 years ago here. I mean, that's just one state, North Carolina, 10.5 million people, right? I mean, so you imagine how much is spent in other races across the country. And we see this. One of the sub industries that exists is this petitioning industry, where these firms will come in and for $5 a signature, $7 a signature, $8 a signature, plus expenses, they will get you the signatures you need. Now, if you're the Democrats, the Republicans, or if you're in a state like California that has these ballot initiatives, a corporation like Uber, you can spend tens or hundreds of millions of dollars on these efforts. But if you're an independent or a grassroots political organization like we are, how do you do that? I mean, you can't. If we couldn't afford to do that, we tried, and it just wasn't going to work. There's no way we could afford to bring in somebody to help us with this. So what we did was we used our own people. We raised the money, and then we paid our people to do this, our campaign staff, our Green Party membership to do this. And so the great thing about this, where we were able to turn this from being this onerous, hard, exhausting effort that is designed to keep independents and third parties off the ballot, we turned it into an advantage for us because it did two things. One, we were able to get out there and we got 22,000 signatures, well more than what we needed. And by doing that with our people, right, with people who are Greens, people who are socialists, people who are leftists, people who are independents, people who believe in what we're doing, why we're running, we were able to also to not just petition, get signatures, but to canvass, to talk to people, to tell them about who we are and to listen to them. So the other part of that as well is that we got to basically act out the campaign and execute the campaign in a manner that would have taken us months to do otherwise. But because of the urgency of it, we had to put together a structure. We had to fill out the organization, fill out the campaign, and this way we were able to really identify who our key people are. People were able to be excited. We were able to know who was dependable. I mean, so we were able to take what, again, because it did, this sucked up and it gets purposeful. So you imagine you're in an independent campaign or your grassroots political campaign, and you go out there and you're trying to collect 14,000 valid signatures, and all of your effort, months of your time, your energy, your organization, your money, all goes towards doing this, and you're doing nothing else because this is what you have to do to get on the ballot. And so, of course, it's going to be your primary thing. But what you realize is that it takes so much, it becomes almost your only thing. And again, that's another purposeful thing to do to exhaust, independent or a third party candidacy, is just put all this weight on them to execute like this in a focused manner or limited manner of time, and watch them not be able to accomplish that. And so the fact that we were able to do that, but then use it to our advantage, again, by talking to tens of thousands of people, and as well as helping us form the core of our campaign by having to execute right up front, we were able to turn what for a lot of campaigns end up being either drag them down or just completely eliminate them. We were able to turn it into a success story, besides the fact that, we did something that most people said we wouldn't be able to do.
Well, let's go top line here, because I'm sure you're aware there are a lot of studies that show that the largest contingent, the largest block of the electorate, non-voters, people that don't participate. And there are people that look at this and would look at your race, Matt, and say, oh, what the hell? Why bother? I mean, this isn't going to make any difference. We can't get anything accomplished this way. The days of the duopoly in this country, it prevails, and we can't beat it in the electoral system. The only thing that we can do is get in the street. The only thing that we can do is direct action. But I heard you say something interesting once, and you said this is still and probably will be a piece of the puzzle. And we, meaning us on the left as an example, we can't cede this part of the process. But that was the terminology that you used.
Correct. We can't. We can. This is part of it. It's not the only thing. We have this mania in our country to only have one answer for everything. Like it has to be A or B. It has to be, and that's the two-party system. It's got to be binary. It's either red or blue. And we see that kind of falling into, say, like the gun control debate right now. It's either gun control or mental health. And there's nothing else we can talk about, you know, and you got to talk about both of those things. Plus there's other things we have to talk about when it comes to, you know, the 20,000 gun homicides we have in this country every year. Right. I mean, but, you know, so we have this fixation on having just two competing solutions. So it's got to either be electoralism or direct action, you know, and it's got to be both. And it's got to be a host of other things as well. Mutual aid, education, you know, communications, you know, I mean, it's got to be a host of other things that go into it. We have to look at a movement on the left as a body, and that these are all just various parts or limbs, appendages of that body, you know. So the electoralism, running campaigns to put pressure on the system through the political process, is just one part of that body. It's just a political organization, a political party needs to be the arm of a much larger movement. When it exists for itself, as the Democrats and Republicans do now, you see the results of that. It exists for itself. It doesn't have a constituency it represents. They don't have principles or values that they consistently uphold and follow. The importance to them is simply their own survival. Right. And I mean, so you see that over and over again. Look, we have, you know, we have down here in North Carolina, we have 15 Democrats running for federal office, 1 for Senate and 14 for the U.S. House. And you have only one of those 15 support Medicare for all, you know, but they will say in their platform how they believe healthcare is a human right, but they don't support actually providing that health care to people. You know, same time, the Democrat down here who's running for in Congressional District 9, a guy named Ben Clark, we have our own version that just passed our state Senate of Florida's Don't Say Gay bill. So the Democrat who's running for Congress down here in District 9, he voted for that Don't Say Gay bill. Right. We have the guy in District 1, Don Davis, running as a Democrat for the U.S. House. He's voted repeatedly to defund Planned Parenthood, as well as other anti-abortion type legislation in his time in the state house. I mean, so, and we can go on and on with the list of what they actually do as opposed to what they say. So, you know, I mean, what we found, though, as we were out there talking to, again, tens of thousands of people over the course of a couple months, because people have asked me this, what were they saying to, you know, what were the issues? And I, you know, of course, inflation, the cost of housing is a huge thing, just the general cost of living. Our messaging was heavy on ending the war on drugs. We would have signs that would say legalize it, end the war on drugs, and people would come right over to us, not because they were, you know, I want to be allowed to get high in a park. You know, maybe there are a few people like that, I think, but most of them because it was the end the war on drugs message. I mean, I had cops sign. We had cops sign that, not in uniform, but guys would come over and gals would come over and they would sign our petition. You talk to them and they tell you they're a police officer. Yeah. And they know it every day, you know, and you would have these experiences be quite emotional because you would have, and depending upon where we're at and the crowd we were at. But I mean, we were at one event over a weekend where every hour I was getting a story from someone, a family member, a spouse, a loved one, a friend, about someone who either had OD'd, and we have 12 overdose deaths a day in North Carolina right now, 12. Wow. Or a story about the criminal prosecution of someone. I mean, I can see it in my neighborhood. I can see it, you know, sure. I mean, you know, this nonviolent drug charge from 15 years ago still ruling somebody's lives. You know, the parole officer coming and the person has to stand there, the parole officer in front of their kids. Like that dominates their lives, this drug charge from 2008 or something like that. You know, I mean, like, you know, I mean, so you see, those are two things. But the big thing that people talk to us about, I mean, over and over again, was what you were alluding to, this dissatisfaction with the political system. right? This need for something different. And we heard that all the time, right? We heard the need for, we need people like you guys on the ballot. I mean, they have conservatives be like, you guys are socialists. I'm not voting for you, but you need to be on the ballot because we need something different. We need change. And the only way this thing is going to change is we force it to. I mean, so one of the things for us is that just so happened that the last 2 weeks of our petitioning period were also the 2 weeks of early voting for primaries here in North Carolina. And so we would be right outside the polling station. And as people will come out, we would, ask them to sign our petition to be recognized as a political party. And so literally 2 or 3 minutes after they had just filled out a Republican or a Democratic primary ballot, they were signing our sheet for, right? I mean,
sure.
Like that type of thing. Like literally 2 or 3 minutes later, they're signing for the Green Party, because even though they had just done the most, and this was like at the most partisan thing we could be at, in a sense, right? And here people are. I mean, there are times when, get talking to them, and then I tell them I'll be running if we get on the ballot, if we get the party recognized. And people who had just, again, 2 or 3 minutes before had voted for either the Democrat or the Republican on for the U.S. Senate, and then they're saying to me a couple minutes later, like, "No, I'll vote for you. I'm so dissatisfied with everything." I mean, so we saw that this need, this desire, the urgency of things have to change. People understand that what is happening with the two-party system is that it's not that it's just corrupt, but that is making things worse.
And we're going to talk some more about the issues, the policies, and the programs to try to set a rightful course here in this country, leftful course. I don't know how you want to refer to that, but I want to bring this up on stream here because I wanted to get into this because a lot of people that watch podcasts by George know all about Matthew Ho, but people might be joining us for the first time today. This is right off of your website, Matt, and it's your About page. It says, I spent 10 years in the Marine Corps and went to war 3 times before realizing the courage to stand against those unjust, immoral, and counterproductive wars. Since 2009, I have not only fought against the war machine, but also against the systemic political and financial rot that underlies and connects our problems in North Carolina, the United States, and beyond. It's not just the overseas wars that have stolen futures from our country and others. It's also wars against the working class, the continued racial injustices, the war on drugs that we were talking about, the criminal for-profit healthcare system, our unsustainable housing crisis, and so many other inequalities, injustices, and inequities that not only stifle individuals and families, but diminish and hold back entire neighborhoods, communities, municipalities, and our entire country. I love my country. More to the point, I love the people of my country, and I see them suffering. 62% of Americans want a third party. I think that number may have gone higher since that polling was done. I remember that poll. And also, if you go and you poll people below the age of 65, that number gets even higher. It's only the people that have been around since, the Wayback Machine that want to continue with this duopoly that we're having. They know how much the current political and financial systems hold us back and how better we can be. So you go on to make a plea there for people joining your campaign. It sounds like a lot of people did. And congratulations again for getting that done, for getting on the ballot, Matt. And I want to take this down off screen here, see if I can get this to come down here. Okay, we're back. I want to get into these issues of the day. And I mentioned this Uvalde situation. Now, this is something that you're uniquely qualified to talk about because you know about weaponry, you know about guns, you know about circumstances, you know about the chaos that erupts when gunfire breaks out. You've been around it, you've seen it. There's a lot of reporting now coming out about Uvalde, and I talked about this on my podcast here just over the past week or so with Steven Semler and Joe Gorton with Brady United. And now I'm seeing something that I like even less than the reporting that we were seeing earlier. We're starting to focus on scapegoating. We're starting to try to find somebody to hang on a hook as a means of explaining what happened down there. And they're really kind of missing the point.
Right.
It says Uvalde is not alone. Police communication during the mass shootings is not always smooth. And it talks about the fact that, this police chief's radio wasn't on. Earlier, they talked about the fact that a door to the school was open or unlocked when it was supposed to be closed or whatever. And I'm like, God, I mean, you talk about not being able to see, the forest for the trees or whatever. There's a much bigger issue here in play. And the mass shooting situation, these school massacres, is this something that people were talking about in North Carolina on the campaign trail?
No, just because it hadn't been dominating the headlines. So the last couple weeks of the petitioning was when the anticipated Roe verdict was leaked, right? So that became a thing, kind of people. But predominantly people were talking about was affecting them directly. I would expect that if I was out there right now, we'd hear more about it because people are afraid for their children. And they're afraid for their communities, and they see, just like other parts of the United States, the epidemic of gun violence. I mean, look, we have a country that the leading killer of our children are guns. I mean, it's just I don't even know how to say anything about that. I mean, and the third biggest killer of our children is overdoses. So from 1 year old to 18 years old, if, your likely cause of death is either guns, automobile accidents, and overdoses. I mean, automobile accidents, you can kind of understand and say, okay, I'm sure there's a lot of things we could do in terms of improving that, right? However, the guns and the overdoses, it just leads us back to this idea that we've got a society that is really burdened by a number of issues, one of them being violence as a preferred solution for our problems. And we see that throughout our government. And then, but I really like the point you were just making, George, about the scapegoating, if only there had been better radio.
Yes.
Right. If only the door had not been and then we find that the door was actually closed, but it didn't lock or something. If only, if only, that's not we have 400 million guns in this country, more guns than people. That is, as Cornel West says, this is the intersection of might makes right and greed is good. That classroom where those children and those teachers were massacred, that's the intersection of might makes right and greed is good. We are here because of deliberate decisions our government has made, our elected officials have made for their own purposes or for their purposes of their donors or the purposes of their reelection chances. To continue to allow these weapons to be freely available. And it's just not the rifles, it's not the assault weapons, the same weapons I carried in Iraq. These are also the mass amounts of handguns that are just everywhere in this country, and the handguns are the things that cause most of the homicides. So it's a much larger issue. Of course, we need legislation. Of course, we need to be doing things. Background checks for every weapon. I mean, if you sell me your granddad's old musket, from the back of your car, there needs to be a background check. I mean, there's so many things that can be done that are relatively simple and would make would have an effect. We have to have a massive buyback program. But the problem is that we have this culture, we have this fetishization, this fetishization of weapons and violence, where people, as Barack Obama said, cling to their guns, and they do. And so how we're going to unwind and unpack, the fact that the majority of guns are owned by a minority of people, is a real problem.
Arsenalists, they call them.
Yeah. I think, but it goes, for me, it really goes back to the celebration of violence we have in this country. We see it in the media, that we see it in movies and video games, those kinds of things. And I'm not arguing for censorship at all. I'm just saying we have to be aware of the psyche that we have in this country that celebrates violence. And certainly, if you have a government that commits violence overseas, a government where its police forces kill 1,000, 1,100 people every year on our streets, how do you not expect that type of psyche to have worked throughout the entire populace? And then when you put it into the history, right, this idea that we were born through violent revolution, we violently took the continent We violently took parts of the world. We defeated the greatest threat the world ever saw in Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan through violence. When those things are repeated over and over again, you have those two. I think that really has a psychological impact on our country, and we have this need for weaponry. So I mean, it's a very, but yeah, certainly saying, well, if the police had better radios, this wouldn't have happened, as you said, misses the entire point.
Well, and I said on the earlier podcast with Joe Gorton, I think a lot of this is magic thinking by Americans. We've been so conditioned by Hollywood to believe that things are going to go the way that they go in movies, and
Right.
that everything is going to happen in a sequence. That when an AR-15 starts popping off, I mean, all that shit goes out the window. I mean, it's time to get real. Mistakes happen. People don't run into gunfire by and large. The cops aren't going to do that. And for people to think otherwise, they've just been watching too much Clint Eastwood, too much John Wayne or whatever. I'd love to see, Denzel Washington and some of these Hollywood actors come out and tell people the gunplay in the movies is simply that. It's play. It's not real. And then the second solution that I had, and then it's just, these are pieces of the puzzle. We've got to find out a way to keep fathers in the home so that these young men, when they're reaching adulthood and they're committing these horrific crimes, they have the firm hand of the father, and they have an influence that's positive in their homes. And some of that might go to what Matt was talking about earlier. We got to keep them out of jail. We got to keep them out of prison for these minor drug offenses. I mean, keep them in the homes, and maybe we incentivize a little bit through the government. Maybe you get a tax break if dad's in the home, if he's helping raise the kids, something like that.
Right.
Moms, but that's a topic for another day. We got a lot of issues to talk about here, Matt. One thing I did want to touch on, and this is a good example. Now we're talking about the gun violence issue here. We've talked about the military. You're in North Carolina. North Carolinians, just like Americans everywhere, man, they love their guns. And it's a big military state. You talked about the fact that, surprising to me, big insurance is very powerful out there in North Carolina, just like it is here. Well, people would look at your candidacy and say, well, Matt Hoe's running in the Green Party, third party. I mean, he just wants to throw some dust up in the air. What the hell's the point? Just vote for the Democrat. No. I mean, if you look at the issues, and we're going to today, the way that you're the issues that you're supporting are not the issues that the Democratic nominee. There is a huge difference, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely. There's not much overlap between the Democrat in the race. And
that's surprising.
Myself. There's not. There's. I would argue there's as much overlap between the Democrat and Republican than with me.
Sure.
And it's particularly when you get into major institutional issues, the support for the health insurance companies, support for the weapons companies, support for the banks, support for big agriculture. I mean, we don't have the corn and the soy like you guys do, but we have the hogs and the chickens.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about hogs here in a little bit.
I mean, so like that type of support for the factory farms. I mean, like you can go down the list of all the overlap, the agreement between the Democrats and Republicans that have a huge effect on our nation. And then, there's also a libertarian in the race, which is a good thing. So there'll be a 4-person race in November, and the libertarians bring a lot of questions to the race as well that aren't spoken about. They bring a consistency in their views. I mean, I don't agree with them, but they bring a consistency in their views that comes from a place of principle and value. As opposed to what is best for our donor base, what is best for us in terms of making sure that, we're in this for the Democrats or Republicans, they just view it as we have to raise more money than the other one does. And in order to do that, we have to make sure we don't cut ties. And that's why you see these certain donor types donating to both, right? Corporations donate to both Democrats and Republicans because they know then they'll receive the benefit of those donations. I mean, we have a system where it's either legalized bribery or a protection racket, whichever way you want to look at it, And so when you start to broaden the political possibilities, broaden the choices available, makes it much harder, particularly when you have Green Party or libertarians or others out there who won't take corporate money. It's difficult then for them to exert that influence, the corporations, the banks, the wealthy, to exert that influence like they do now. So, but no, there's certainly a lot of differences in my campaign and the campaign of the Democrat who's running for U.S. Senate, and these are life and death issues. These are issues of healthcare. These are issues of wages. This is the war on drugs. This is the crime against humanity that's happening on our southern border. I mean, Joe Biden has more people in detention down there than Donald Trump did, including last time I checked, 1,000 children separated from their families still. These were issues that people were rightfully screaming bloody murder about when Donald Trump was in office. I mean, justly saying, screaming bloody murder about this. Silence when Barack Obama was doing it. Rightful anger when Trump was doing it. And now, as they say, back to brunch, right? A sense of that righteous anger has dissipated. Things are normal. And that's something I see when I get confronted. And it's very rare. When we were out there, again, talking to tens of thousands of people, and I'm so proud of the work, our folks did with all that. I really am. But one of the things is that, very rarely, even at the primaries, 2 weeks at the primaries, did we ever get you guys are stealing votes, you're being spoilers, et cetera, et cetera. That was incredibly rare. That is really confined to the spaces of CNN and MSNBC and Fox and on Twitter and Facebook. That's where you see that. When you're out there talking to people, very few people actually go along with you're stealing votes, you're spoiling it. Most people understand that we're offering a real alternative. Most people understand the two-party system has failed and it's going to continue to fail and make things worse. But also, too, the idea that you have to earn votes. How am I stealing votes from another candidate who's not running on the same issues as I am? Who's completely, it's, and so this idea that we're spoiling, of course, our snarky response to that is, how do you spoil an already rotten system? But I reject the idea of being a spoiler, but I certainly embrace the idea of being a disruptor that's one of the prime goals of this campaign, is to disrupt the deadly status quo that exists in our politics, to disrupt it, to force it to change by building another party. And by also, too, making it so uncomfortable for the two major parties that they have to start to change how we do our politics. We have to move towards a ranked choice voting and proportional representation. We have to get money out of politics. We have to get rid of the filibuster. We have to get rid of the electoral college. These types of things, those aren't going to change. Those are the things that keep the status quo the way it is. That's not going to change unless we put existential pressure on it itself. And among other things we were talking about before, there's a lot of other things to do, whether it be, like we're saying, direct actions, bodies in the streets, but also, too, this type of political pressure coming from within the system to radically change it.
You've been on podcasts by George a lot. You've been very kind to do that through the years here. I think I'm coming up on my 4-year anniversary for doing the PBG, Matt. And you and I have talked a lot about the 2020 world, 20 minutes from a nuclear sub, 20 years, maybe all that we have with climate, maybe even less than that. And that plays into what we're talking about here. And it reminds me of what Jimmy Dore talks about a lot. He says, you got to bite the bullet one time. You got to vote against these major parties one time. And the example that he cites is 2016. He says, everybody that voted for Bernie, and stats show this, they came down and they voted for Hillary. They didn't, vote for Trump. They didn't stay at home. They did what they were supposed to do. They voted blue no matter who. And the point that he makes is Trump won anyway. And the bigger issue here is what you're talking about. If they had done that, and if they had gone out and voted for, if they had voted third party instead of voting for Hillary, the Democratic Party would have seen that in 2016, and it would have forever changed, perhaps. It would have moved left after that to get those people that vacated and that they would have thought was responsible for them losing in 2016. Instead, we got Trump anyway. And his point is, if you just bite the bullet one rotation, that may be all that it takes to make the changes in the Democratic Party, because you ain't going to change the Republican Party. Not really. That we need to have.
Trump is, but it's a way that is really dangerous and awful. But Trump is changing it. So But yeah, no.
The Tea Party changed it, and they did
Yeah.
exactly what we're talking about. They pushed it right. They pushed it
Right.
clear off the political platform, basically. I mean, they ran John Boehner out of town, basically. They drove that man nuts, and we need a third party. We need real progressives. We need people on the left throwing a wrench in the works here to do that same type of thing. Now, I guess the question is, with your candidacy, the next big step for you after getting on the ballot would be to appear in some of these debates, televised debates, and raise some of these issues and points that you're talking about. Is that going to happen? Are these debates scheduled? When does that happen?
Yeah, let me get back to that in a second because I just want to say, Democratic voters did, and I don't know if they were Democrats or unaffiliated or who they were, but they did do this, roughly 12.5 million people who voted for Obama in 2012 voted for Trump or stayed home in 2016. So they already did that. It's very similar to, when we talk about issues of labor, the need for workers to be able to strike, right? To withhold. If you're upset with your job, the conditions are terrible. The pay is not what is just. If you continue to show up to work every day, you continue to bring money in for that business you work for, what leverage do you have? And the same with voters. Your leverage is at the ballot box. There's other ways too. You can donate, you can volunteer, but the prime and so to strike in that sense from the two parties is what's necessary to get them to change. And as you said, the Tea Party is a great example of that. Really is. They came along and they said, look, if you don't do what we say, we're going to leave, and we're going to basically are putting a gun to the Republican Party's head. And the Republican Party said, okay, and they went, to the detriment of this nation, right? But it was something that was effective politically, and that's a strategy. That's a something that has been seen, throughout history. That's happened to parties. That's how parties change. That's how parties take on. You look at, say, the Populist Party in the late 19th century, and the number of things that they espoused, especially for workers and working conditions, that were so popular that the Populist Party became a danger to both the Democrat and Republican Party, and both of those parties consumed the Populist Party. They just basically took over the issues, and that's how the Populist Party goes away. Oversimplifying it, but right. So this idea is exactly that, and you have, if you continue to vote for the status quo, it's just going to keep the status quo. And the argument that, well, the Republicans are worse, and the guy who's running for U.S. Senate down here for the Republicans, Ted Budd, who's a Trump endorsed candidate, he's terrible. Absolutely horrible. This is hideous. But it's incrementalism that we're seeing here with that, in terms of, yes, he is incrementally worse than the Democrat. We're still going to have, look, with COVID, 1 million people are dead. We've got the worst record on COVID in the world, in the wealthiest nation. And of those 1 million people, the estimates are that a third died because of a lack of health insurance. Before COVID, we had...
That's 300,000 people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Before COVID, we know that anywhere from 50 to 70,000 people were dying a year from a lack of health insurance. This is something that the two-party system agrees upon. You look at the fact that workers did not receive a wage, have not received a wage increase in 45 years. The whole financialization policies of my whole life since the Nixon administration have been to make sure that corporations and banks, the money that used to go to workers, now stay with them. It gets reinvested in the stock market. It goes into stock buybacks. It goes to executives. We're going to make the dollar strong. This way, that forces manufacturing out, so corporate costs go down. Those corporations then take that money and buy factories overseas, where, because the dollar's strong, imports are cheap. So, and then because we're not putting money back into workers, we're putting it back into the corporations. That means workers' wages go down, while workers can rely on credit then. So the banks are happy. That's how we get to this point. And those are the policies, the financialization policies, that Democrats and Republicans supported for decades together. So if we're going to keep voting for that, that's what you're going to get. That's what we have an issue here. I don't know how much we have it out in Iowa, George, with corporations, these holding companies coming in and purchasing homes. and
I've
many
heard
of
of
them
that.
are entry-level homes. And in parts of North Carolina last year, haven't seen the numbers for this year, but last year, 1 in 5 homes were being purchased by a corporation.
Like
You know,
BlackRock. Yeah.
yeah, but and where these come out of, this is not something that just grew organically. So in the 2008 financial, the recession, the Great Recession, uh, 10, 11 million families lost their homes. They received no support from the federal government, no support from Barack Obama. The government bails out the banks, though, who created the mess. No one was ever held accountable, and they get bailed out. The banks take that bailout money. They create these holding companies. These holding companies then go and purchased those 11 million foreclosed properties. And that's the genesis of this corporate takeover of housing. Right. And then what they do, of course, is that they then rent out these homes. And we see that the homes that are rented by institutions are much more expensive than homes that are rented by, individual owners. And this has been developing to the point now that it is causing a very real problem here in North Carolina, because these corporations can come in and, all right, we'll give you $30,000-$40,000 over asking. No problem. We're not going to ask for an inspection. We're not going to, we're going to waive all this, and so it does two things. It pushes up the cost of housing, and that also makes it very, very difficult for families, particularly families who are trying to get into housing for the first time coming out of a rental unit, to be able to do that. And these are deliberate government policies that have enabled this. So when we talk about the commonality of the Democrat and Republican Party, this is how it affects people throughout the country. Your question about the debates, yeah, we'll see. I would not be surprised. So Ted Budd, the Republican, he went through the Republican primary without participating in a debate. He didn't show up for any of the 4 or 5 Republican debates. I mean, he just didn't show up.
I hate that. Yeah.
He didn't. And he won handedly. I mean, he beat a former governor. He beat another former congressman. He beat a combat veteran. And there are a host of other people as well. But like, he had real challengers, people with real political experience, or some people with a story to tell, and he beat them. Wasn't a problem, because he had Trump's endorsement, it seemed like, and he had a ton of money behind him. And the Democrats, what they did was, so Sherry Beasley, who is the Democratic nominee, last year, there were 2 other Democrats, both of them more progressive than her, who were moved out of the Senate race by the Democratic Party. We hear these stories about Governor Cooper called, Chuck Schumer called, and lo and behold, the 2 other candidates that were running at the top for the Democrats, Erica Smith and Jeff Jackson, all of a sudden had House races that they could run in. And so the primary on the Democratic side was cleared out so that Beasley had no competition. And Beasley does very little public events, very few public events. Everything so far has been private. You can't go see her talk unless you have an invitation, kind of thing. Softball interviews on MSNBC, so there's quite possible we won't have debates here in North Carolina.
They can't afford to go, I suppose. Talk about the money. My God, the money is unbelievable with these candidates that you have out there in North Carolina.
Yeah. I mean, like, you're talking about an unopposed Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate who raised $10 million in a matter of months. I mean, just with no opposition for the primary. As I said earlier, the 2020 U.S. Senate race, $300 million was spent on the race. Tom Tillis, the Republican who won, spent $25 million. Cal Cunningham, the Democrat who lost, spent $50 million. And then there was $225 million of outside money in that race. This is the dark money. This is the Citizens United money. Right? I mean, like, this is where you see it, the effect. And $300 million. You're telling me that money doesn't buy loyalty? That doesn't buy obedience. Again, it's either legalized bribery or a protection racket. It's one or the other. You give me, on the candidate side, you give me the money and I'll take care of you. No one's going to mess with you. We're not going to raise your taxes or make sure you're not polluting the rivers or anything like that. Right. I mean, like, the corruption is insane. The amount of money people see that and they realize it. and it turns them away. They feel pushed out. I don't feel that people are not. There are certainly some people who are apathetic, but I feel that majority of people who are not participating in the political system are doing so because they feel like they've been pushed out of it. They've been excluded from it. Why bother? Why matter? One of the things you brought up about the unaffiliated voters, very interesting. 20 years ago, the Republicans had 33% of the registered voters in North Carolina. About 17% were unaffiliated, and the Democrats had close to 50% of the registered voters in North Carolina. It's about 25 years ago. Over the last 25 years, the Republicans have stayed constant. About a third of the voters are registered as Republicans. The Democrats lost 17% of that share.
Wow.
So they went from being at almost 50% down to about a third. And now unaffiliated are the primary are the biggest block of voters in North Carolina. About 35% are unaffiliated. So you saw the dissatisfaction with the Democratic Party over the last 25 years, where people left it in droves. I mean, cut the share it had of registered voters in half. And they didn't go to the Republicans. They chose to be unaffiliated. So this understanding that the system is not just corrupt, but it's broken and it's harming us, but people want to be involved. People feel that they need to continue with it in many ways. So they don't just drop out, they register as unaffiliated, and they hope that something different comes along. And I think that was, as you agree, one of the things that Trump was so good at, to our detriment, right, was understanding that people want something different. People want someone to come in and drain the swamp. He just
pack of lies that this guy spread, but they were the lies people wanted to hear. Yeah, it tells you what the issues are. And we're talking about a lot of issues here, but for Podcast by George, as you know, it's always the big three: climate, war, and healthcare. And the elephant in the room for me is always climate. And this goes back to what I was talking about with the 2020 world. I mean, 20 years with this climate situation sounds melodramatic, but it might even be less than that. Matt, I'm telling people on my show that I think California and Arizona may run out of water in a couple of years. We're talking millions of people with no water. You want to talk about people vacating a party? How about people vacating a part of this country? Because if they don't have water, they can't keep their homes because the insurance companies won't insure them if they can't have fire protection. I mean, that's just one small example. And if we continue with this status quoism between these two parties, this incrementalism, you got to squint to see the difference between these two parties and these candidates that are doing nothing. Hell, it's going to be game over for climate in 20 years. We can't afford to do that. We don't have that much time. We need to make a change, and make a change quickly in one of these election cycles that I mentioned earlier, and get these things moving, because if we don't, it'll be too late. And that brings me to a comment here I want to bring up on screen from one of the viewers, because I like to encourage people to participate. This is from Suzanne. She says, how's it working out for us doing the same thing every election cycle, feeding the duopoly? Well, I guess the answer from me, Matt, is it ain't working.
Yeah. One of our folks who was out there, she's Green Party member. She's fantastic. Late husband was career Coast Guard, and so she's been around, seen a lot. She's out there petitioning, and she had the unfortunate experience of having the same person come up and confront her about, you're stealing. What are you, a paid Republican operative? You're only helping the Republicans doing the Green Party thing. Jill Stein was a Russian plant, all that nonsense. And Leanne collected, I don't know how many signatures, lot, right? Hundreds or low thousands maybe, or something, right? And she only had that one person who was harassing her like that. So it shows you really, again, how broad this fixation on this partisanship, that I'm not going to say it because it's not a nice thing to say, but the fixation on maintaining the status quo is how limited it is. I mean, where you get the problem is you run into the whole lesser of two evils, where people feel that like the other is such a threat. And yeah, I mean, I will say that the Republican Ted Budd is worse than the Democrat Sherry Beasley in certain ways incrementally. Like certainly on an issue like abortion, of course, I would, side with where Beasley is. And I'm to the left of where Beasley is on abortion. It was only until, if you look at her campaign stuff, like a lot of Democrats, she won't say the word abortion, or it's very limited, or maybe it was a slip up. They say reproductive rights. They're afraid to say the word abortion. I mean, it's this massaging, this managing of the issues, because they're one of the interesting things about the campaign I'm seeing from the Democrat here is they're going to that. They take away the wrong lessons of that shift in Obama voters to Trump voters from 2012 to 2016. They take it away as if there's some type of ideological foundation to that, some type of philosophical reasoning for that shift, as opposed to the reality of the bread and butter issues, the nuts and bolts. These are people who lost their homes, or their families lost their homes, or their friends lost their homes, and they saw the Democrats do nothing for them. They saw their lives just actually worsen, but you see with the Democrats here running this, we're going to try and pull Republicans away from the Republican Party, as opposed to addressing the needs of working families, as opposed to addressing the issues of climate, of healthcare, of education, of wages. The latest advertisement, I'm not kidding you, for the Democrat down here running for U.S. Senate is on trafficking. Mean, not to dismiss trafficking. It's a very important issue, but it's not an issue that has been taken over by the right in a way to twist it and make it into something extreme and something, unrecognizable from the reality of that's actually occurring. But for something you would hear this type of what she's saying, this sounds like something Tucker Carlson would say. But that's what they're going after, and they are ignoring because they feel that it's dependable. You play the Lawrence O'Donnell clip all the time where Lawrence O'Donnell says, look, I work with the Democratic Party. Peter Dow, another guy who used to be with the Democratic Party at high levels, he says the same thing too. Basically we just took the left for granted. We took workers for granted. Where are you going to go?
Let's play that. It doesn't take very long. Here's Lawrence. Watch this.
If you want to pull the major party that is closest to the way you're thinking, to what you're thinking, you must show them that you're capable of not voting for them. If you don't show them you're capable of not voting for them, they don't have to listen to you. I promise you that. I worked within the Democratic Party. I didn't listen or have to listen to anything on the left while I was working in the Democratic Party, because the left.
Okay, so that's the gist of it. I don't know how it could be more clearly stated than that. That maybe led to a broadcasting career, but that's something that you're not going to see on his show very much anymore. Well, I wanted to, we're about out of time, so I want to bring these quick hitters up, as I call it. Really, that's all the Twitter is quick hitters. So I want to read through these and have you comment, Matt. This is from just a few days ago. After the primary, we're the only Senate campaign in North Carolina fighting for popular progressive solutions neither Dems nor Republicans will touch. The health care for all, a real Green New Deal, living wages, affordable housing, canceling student and medical debt, and ending the drug wars. And not coincidentally, I guess, those are all things that poll after poll shows that voters support.
Correct. I mean, I think if you go through our website, our issues page, go to MatthewHoe4Senate.org, you'll be hard pressed to find something that doesn't have majority public opinion support or plurality public opinion support. But as soon as you attach the word socialism to it, it's you can't do it, but no, I mean, this is what sets us apart. And this, I'm not sure how people can look at this. And there's plenty of other issues too that set us apart. Certainly spending for the Pentagon, what's happening at the border, some of the Democratic institutional reforms, electoral reforms that we argue for, on and on and on. We don't have our plan for universal education on there, right? So we support universal education from pre-K through college. Vocational schools included and trade schools included. We can't stop public education at high school level anymore. It just doesn't work. And the debt that people are incurring is holding back 40 million people. But on the other side too, it's causing our nation not to progress economically, societally. You know what I mean?
That's
Like we
the
could
point.
do
Yeah.
much better. You know, for how throughout our history, you look back at some point, they said, you know what? It's really good if everybody has at least an elementary education. And we did it. And then it was like, well, people need more than that. And they did it. Okay, people need a high school education. And that became available to all in this country. Of course, certain groups excluded. People who look like you and I, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like, not to minimize the racial history of this country. And but you know, and then at some point we said, well, it doesn't matter. And meanwhile, as the world advances, as you know, technology advances, as things change, we're still sitting back like we are at the end of the 19th century, earlier 20th century, saying a high school education is all people need. You know, that's simply not true. It's not true. And it holds us back in a dozen or 2 dozen or 3 dozen different ways. I mean, that was the point I was going to get with my friend Leanna I was talking about before I got distracted with Lawrence O'Donnell, was that this lady is you know, going on about winning. And that's what I see with like this ultra partisanship, this identity politics, red versus blue. They refer to it as a game.
Yes.
It's a game, and you hear that over and over again from them. And so about winning, and Leanne says, look around. Who's winning? Who is winning here?
Who's happy? Who likes this? Yeah.
And this is what I find. I know we've talked about this a lot today, but I think it's important to get to speak about it so people clearly understand where the messaging is coming from on this, that you don't need another alternative, that 2 choices is enough. That's all you need. Like that type of messaging, you know, it's coming from, I had this happen on Twitter, you know, Twitter is the last place we should be quoting, right? You know, but this one lady was giving my campaign account a hard time about, you know, and it's a typical spoiler kind of argument.
Right.
And the response back was, we try to stay as professional as possible when dealing with that stuff, right? But well, look at our issues. You see that we're clearly different from Sherry Beasley, Democrats' campaign, you know, and just like that, we are on these issues. We're the only ones representing these issues and working families and climate and so on and so forth. And her response was, while the only issues that matter are those that separate the Democrats and Republicans. I kid you not, George. This person's profile picture was of her showing a horse. And like that type of
horse race. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, someone who shows horses, healthcare is not an issue for them. You know, I mean, that's a war on drugs. That's not affecting them. I mean, although what happens is, I'll tell you what, a lot of people we talk to about overdoses and the addiction and the opioid crisis, you hear these phrases, this wasn't supposed to happen to a family like ours. I mean, the things that are affecting us here, climate, as you were bringing up, is insidious, and it's infecting us all.
Get us all if we don't do something. That's a fact.
That's exactly right. You know, so that's what you find is the people who say that you don't need somebody on the ballot who is arguing for Medicare for all. Those are usually people who don't have people in their family, don't have loved ones who are having to check their bank account before they go to the doctor. You know, that's usually the case that I've found. I don't want to judge too much, but that's what I found is usually the people who dismiss these things are not being affected in their lives. Their loved ones are not being affected by these issues. And look, I mean, a poll came out last week, 2/3 of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. 60% of Americans say they have a hard time making ends meet. You know, I mean, you know, the people are hard hit and they're suffering. It's going to get worse because of climate. As you said, we are in the beginning stages of a climate migration in this country that will completely destabilize and tear apart the societal infrastructure we have. The fact that we're not talking about this. I mean, one of the things you can see behind me, my Green New Deal poster, you know, something that the Green Party has been arguing for more than a decade now, 12, 13 years now, a Green New Deal. One of the integral parts of that, besides remaking the entire energy infrastructure, right, going to clean and renewables and things like that, is this economic Bill of Rights. Because what's going to happen with the climate collapse is that it's going to so undo who we are as a society that if we don't have these basic protections for healthcare, housing, education, and jobs in this country, it is going to be a true, when people talk about the existential crisis that climate change is, this is what they're talking about how it will collapse our entire societal structure if we do not have an economic Bill of Rights to protect and take care of people. It will be really dystopian in 30 years or so.
Economic Bill of Rights. Well, okay, so let's end this way. I mean, we're just out of time here, but I want to bring up one final story. And again, I talked about some of the similarities between North Carolina and Iowa, particularly on the rural side. I mean, and with their hogs and the poisoning of the water and things that Matt talked about. Well, there's something else here. We have big business associated with agriculture, big ag here in this state. Deere Company last year, the UAW went on strike against Deere. It was very interesting to follow. Tragic, also. Some strikers lost their lives walking the line here in Iowa. I mean, they gave their all, at least 2, maybe 3. In this strike. And Deere's reaction to this strike was interesting. It was kind of odd. They would object, they would dig their heels in a little bit, and then they kind of relented very easily. Okay, let's bring this up on screen. This is from my Facebook page, actually. For John Deere is moving its tractor cab production from Waterloo, Iowa to Mexico. Now, North Carolina also has a Deere presence. I looked online, Matt. It's kind of a marketing thing. It's not a huge presence, but they're everywhere, and they're in North Carolina also. For fiscal year 2021, net income attributable to Deere and Company was $5.963 billion in fiscal 2021 during a pandemic, folks. And those people were going to work. Those UAW workers were going to work. They were going to the line in a pandemic, or $18.99 per share, compared with $2.751 billion or $8.69 per share in fiscal 2020. We're talking about 1 year. I'm not a mathematician. That's my figure. You can double check my math because I'm not always the best at that. My God, that's a percent of increase, 216%. And to talk about this economic Bill of Rights, I mean, this strikes right at home. And what's in play here is the shareholders, these stock prices. They hit these record levels by, UAW workers doing the right thing. They thought, going to the line and doing this work during a pandemic. They were able to achieve this growth. Well, what do they want to do? What does any shareholder, what does any stockholder? They want to keep it going. They want to keep it growing. How do you do that? Take it to Mexico. And I guess my overall cynicism with this, to go back how I started here, was that I think Deere and Company had this in their back pocket during those strike negotiations. I think they relented and gave up and said, okay, you're going to force us. It's going to look like you're going to win, which it kind of did when it was all said and done. It looked like the UAW won, but not really. This part of the production is going to Mexico.
Yeah, this is really disappointing news. We've got some good labor news here in North Carolina. We had a Starbucks out in Boone, which is in the mountains, unionize. And then we had just last week, the big Amazon facility down in Garner, which is about 20 miles from me. They're forming a labor union, which is great news. But you see, if you're following, say, the Starbucks, where they've had well more than 100 now Starbucks across the country unionize, the way that Starbucks has gone after those union efforts, firing employees, closing stores, harassing people, right? The media campaign, the blitz for that. If you look and see actually where the loyalties lie. Remember that the CEO of Howard Schultz, who is just on a rampage right now, trying to crush the union efforts in Starbucks, he was, a lot of people in 2020, for the 2020 race, wanted to see Schultz as the Democratic nominee for the U.S. presidency. He did terrible. No one liked him, no one knew who he was. But if you watch the pundits, the Morning Joe on MSNBC, the institutional Democrats loved him. Down here, the Sherry Beasley, the Democratic nominee for Senate, one of her campaign consultants, they have tens of millions of dollars. So they hire these big firms to come in to be consultants and do whatever they do, same firm that advises Amazon on crushing its labor movement. I mean, so you can't divorce what's happening with Deere. Deere has the protection of politicians, both Republicans and Democrats, to do exactly this, to pick up and move to Mexico. You get into issues of trade protectionism and all that. But when you look at those questions of trade protectionism, of do we want to interfere in that kind of thing, I think the answer has been settled for a long time now. I mean, maybe this was an issue to discuss in the 50s and 60s, as America was really, in the wake of World War II. We're the only industrialized country still standing, you know, Canada and Australia, I guess, but everyone else has been bombed out and burnt out, you know. So as we expand and we have this idea of free trade, it's all corrupted, right, by the fact that we're the only ones capable of doing this, you know. So we've been, but now we're at the point, you know, we've seen the results of neoliberal economic policies for the last 50 years. Again, workers haven't seen a raise in 45 years. People are being crushed right now at highest levels of debt ever recorded.
Yes.
You know, it's only getting worse.
Worse
You
than
know,
the Great Depression. Yeah.
this idea that Deere can just be able to pick up and move to Mexico because it doesn't want to pay its people any longer. Well, we know that the argument about, well, whether that's good overall and there'll be long-term effects and we've got to encourage that argument's dead. We see what happens. We're living what happens when we allow corporations to do exactly what Deere is doing. I mean, one of the big things for the Green Party is we believe in employee ownership, that workers should be in control of the production, not stockholders. Particularly as we've discussed before, George, when 95% of the S&P 500 is owned, the primary owner of 95% of the S&P 500 are 5 different banks. That's it.
Yeah.
Right. So Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street, a couple others, guarantee you they are the principal shareholders of Deere. You know,
sure.
they're the principal shareholders of Raytheon,
Yeah.
and they're the principal shareholders of Tyson Foods or whoever, right? You know,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to it, and who's standing up for the workers?
Yeah.
You know, what's happening there in Waterloo? I can't imagine. You don't have many Democrats there, but I'd be interested in seeing what those what the attitudes are of the Democratic Party to this. I'm sure they're expressing outrage, but
sure.
what have they done to protect workers from this happening? And that's, again, just another argument for why the system needs to be, broken apart and rebuilt. And we're not going to do that by just continuing to go along with the status quo.
And that's what he'll do, folks. He's not going to be a member of the status quo. He's not going to fall in line. You get him to the U.S. Senate. If North Carolina would do that, my God, we could change the world. By the way, Matt, guess what happened to Deere's stock price right after they announced that move to Mexico?
Oh, I'm sure it went. Yeah, I know. And it's just not Deere. The entire, I mean, and we've got such false narratives on so many things with the guns. When we were talking about the guns, I was reminded that Senator Kennedy from Louisiana said you need to have an AR-15 because of feral pigs. That's why you need an AR.
We've lost our minds. Yeah.
And someone else too said something about there's nothing better for shooting raccoons than an AR-15 or something like that.
They just legalized using them. Vets, as a matter of fact, can get special licenses or to use AR-15s, assault rifles, to hunt deer.
Yeah, I mean, the lies, the actual lies
in this state.
The lies. And so the lies we hear about inflation right now, that it's caused because you got a check, because you got a $1,400 check 16 months ago. This is why we have inflation. The media repeats it. It's complete nonsense. Meanwhile, organizations like Economic Policy Institute actually do the hard work, look at it, and they say, oh, it's because corporations raise their prices. Only 8% of current inflation can be tied to increased labor costs, or, but it's just because they simply desired. Look, if inflation was real, in the sense that there was this, and it is real, I should say that, and there were things about our inflation, our supply chain issues, the war in Ukraine, the pandemic. I mean, there are things that really drove it. But if it was real in the sense that it was causing corporations to suffer, we wouldn't have seen record corporate profits like we did last year, where profits were going up. Because if inflation is real, in the sense that there's a rise in prices throughout the economy, then Deere's production costs should have been so much higher that they would not have been able to have that 216% increase in profits like they did. Yeah. So there's just a lie that in both parties, because they're capitalist parties, go along with those lies, whether it be for AR-15s or for inflation or for why Deere should be able to fire all its people and move to Mexico.
My God. Well, as I mentioned, we got to let him go. I wore my green shirt today. I don't know if you noticed it or not, but I mean, that was what that was all about. Now, I've been On the Chiron, on the Supra, the lower part of the screen, I've been running these web addresses where people can get in touch, but that's only for people that are looking, that are viewing. Now, this is going out in audio too. So if you would kind of give us a close here and then tell people all of the various ways they can get in touch with you, the Green Party, your campaign in North Carolina.
Sure. Thank you, George. Yeah, and I listen to your show via audio. So yeah, I appreciate when you do that. It's the website is MatthewHoforsenate.org. Last name spelled HOH and for FOR, spelled out. So MatthewHoforsenate.org. Please go to the website. If you can donate, please donate. It makes you a little sick to your stomach. I'm a first-time candidate.
Oh, I've done it. Made me
right.
feel good.
You're out
I'm
here,
it,
like arguing to get money out of politics. And the next thing you say is, please give me money. But it's the way it works. And we're up against the Leviathan here. We really are.
We can't cede that part of it. That's a great way to, we can't give up. Yeah.
You can't give up. You have to. So if people can assist us with donations and also too volunteers, we need help. If you don't have to be in North Carolina to help us out. So please, please sign up, volunteer, donate, follow us on social media. You can look up Matthew Hofer Senate on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram, and then retweet, because one of the things is trying to get people to know about us. We've got 7.5 million registered voters here in North Carolina. How do we get in front of them? Yes. And we don't have the money. We're not going to have if they spent $300 million in 2020, the Democrats and Republicans, they'll spend 325 or 350 or 400 million this year. We don't have the money to compete with that. It's just the way it is. And so we need alternatives. And so your support can help us find alternative ways of getting out there, talking to people, letting people know that we exist and that there are other options other than, the duopoly, the two-party system.
Well, that's well said. That's great. That's a good ribbon. That's a good bow to put on the end of it here. Matthew Ho for U.S. Senate. Thanks again for coming on another edition of the podcast by George Liveline.
Thank you, George.
And folks, if you like podcasts by George, if you like seeing Matthew Ho, and he's on regularly, we've had him on several times. He's a guy to follow. He's got the message that we have got to start picking up on. Just subscribe to Podcast by George. Now, the easiest way to do that is to go to podcastbygeorge.com. All of the various platforms are there, the little badges, the little icons that you can click on. Facebook and YouTube are automatic. Subscribe, like us, and follow us there. But then also the audio platforms like Matt, he listens to the audio broadcasts, and those are available on iTunes, Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, Amazon Prime, all kinds of different places, Stitcher even, where Podcast by George can be heard. You can sign up there. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George Liveline.